Hello, this is the Be Live Show, and I'm Sharon Stenifoy with the Be Live Show called Say It in Your Own Words, and I have as my guest Mary Amato. Thank you for being here, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
And she is the project coordinator of a group that's affiliated with the Cambridge Prevention Coalition, and it's called OPEN, and OPEN stands for Overdose Prevention and Education Network, and we're glad to have this educational tool in our community. They're located at 51 Inman Street, and I hear that you have a kickoff event on Wednesday, May 13th. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the kickoff event that's coming up in the second week of May is just a chance for the community to get to know us and get to know the project, and learn about the different kinds of services that we provide. And also hopefully it'll be a chance for providers who have been working on this project and the staff to get to know the community, and for everyone to sort of be in the same place at the same time and have a chance to mingle and get to know each other.
Okay, and I understand there are two groups that you are targeting in this education effort, and could you tell us a little bit about who you would like to come to this event?
Sure, absolutely. So the event is open to everyone, but we specifically want to make sure that we reach out to sort of two main groups.
Okay.
So the first group is providers and professionals in the community who might be working with people who are at risk for overdose. So some things that we can do for them are provide educational workshops on overdose prevention, overdose recognition, sort of recognizing the signs of an overdose, and appropriate response, so they know what to do if they're in contact with someone who's overdosing. We also can provide them with materials that sort of support that education, and then also provide them with technical assistance, so that if they want to incorporate overdose prevention into their work, they can do that on sort of an ongoing basis, so that they know how to train their staff and it can be more sustainable. The second group that we want to reach out to is pretty much everyone else. So the general community, the people who are friends and family of those who might be at risk for overdose. And so really we just want to be available for these people at any level that they feel comfortable. So whether it's just calling the office and asking a question, coming to the kickoff event and sort of having a chance to enjoy some food and chit-chat a little bit while we're sort of learning about these issues. And then also we do community drop-in hours, which are the second Monday of every month from 5 to 7 p.m. at the Windsor Street Health Center at 119 Windsor Street, so that people can come in and access resources, learn about overdose and other issues related to drug use, get referrals to other programs and centers in the area that provide similar services, and hopefully realize that there are other people in the community who are going through the same thing that they are, and so they might have a chance to talk with someone who has a similar experience.
Good. And what agencies are in your network that you collaborate with in Cambridge?
Sure. So we have a committee that steers this project that's been really helpful to us in terms of deciding what kinds of projects we want to offer and for sort of getting the word out there. We have members on our committee who are from the Cambridge Public Health Department. We have staff from the Cambridge Hospital, especially the emergency department. We've also been working with some folks from Mount Auburn Hospital. We have some active committee members who work on the police department. And then also lots of other service providers in the area. CASPAR, which is an agency that deals with substance use. Also Cambridge Cares About AIDS, which does a lot of work with people who use drugs themselves and does a lot of education with them, and then also lots of homeless service providers in the area, because a lot of times there's an overlap between homelessness and drug use.
And what did you do before becoming coordinator of this program? Were you a nurse? Were you in the medical field? Or?
No, actually, so I have my degree in sociology, and I started working with folks who were using drugs when I was first out of college, working at a syringe exchange program in New Haven, Connecticut. And I sort of came to Massachusetts in a roundabout way and ended up working at a homeless service agency called Youth on Fire. which is a drop-in center for homeless youth in Harvard Square. And so that's how I really got to learn about what puts folks at risk for overdose and what other sort of issues are weighing on them that make it really dangerous.
And what are the factors that put people at risk of overdose?
So there are a couple of things. First of all, there are sort of the biological or medical risks of overdose. So those include issues related to fluctuations in drug purity levels. So a lot of drug overdoses happen because of opioids. So opioids are a class of drug that are all sort of derived from the same chemical, but they include heroin, methadone, and then lots of prescription pain medications like Oxycontin and Percocet are some really common ones. However, heroin is the big one, and it's really dangerous because since it's not legal, there's no way to regulate it, and so someone who might be used to using a certain amount, a certain number of times a day, if suddenly the purity level of that goes up and they don't know, then they could be at risk for overdose. So fluctuations in purity level is one. Another big risk for overdose is when folks experience a lowering in their tolerance. So if somebody stops using for a couple of days because they go away or go into a program or something like that, their tolerance to the drug is lowered. So if they go back to using the same amount that they were before they went away, then they can be at big risk. And then also something that can put people at risk for overdose, or something that can be an indicator of overdoses in the future, is if they've already overdosed in the past. It seems to be something that people experience multiple times, and that's more of sort of an environmental factor. So already overdosing in the past, also being homeless can put people at risk for overdose just because of the sort of stressful situation that they're in a lot of other ways. And then also what we've found is that overdose can be more dangerous, especially if the drug that puts people at risk for overdose is mixed with other things. So if someone uses opioids and alcohol at the same time, or opioids and drugs called benzodiazepines, which are anti-anxiety medications, those two things together can be really dangerous and push someone over the edge really easily. And so those are sort of the main things that we try to keep in mind as far as risks.
And people surrounding a person who uses drugs might be fearful of getting in touch with the help because they don't know what to do. They're afraid of legal concerns. They just, the chaos of the situation makes them unclear about what to do.
Absolutely. So that's something that we have heard a lot from folks that we interviewed when we were going through the data collection process for this project. And it's a rational thing to feel, I think. You know, people are in a state of panic. There's drugs involved, right? Somebody is, experiencing this medical emergency, but at the same time, people need to consider the situation that they're in. If they've also been using drugs, does that mean they could get in trouble? If they haven't, if they're just a family member or a friend, does this mean their neighbors will know? When the police come, could they get in trouble? Do they live in an apartment complex where these kinds of things aren't allowed? And
Right.
so it's something that we encounter a lot.
If there are children in the home?
Absolutely,
things like that.
absolutely. There's lots of things that can make it really complicated. And so something we try to do is, first of all, really stress the importance of getting medical attention. Of course, there are fears and anxiety involved, but this person is going to have the best chance of survival and a full sort of medical recovery if they get, professional medical attention. So some things that we try to let people know is okay to do is, first of all, just being at the scene of an overdose is not reason for any sort of consequences or arrest. So just being in the presence of someone who's overdosing won't get you in trouble. Also, when somebody is going to call 911, we let them know that it's okay to say, my friend isn't breathing. They don't have to say, there's drugs or they overdosed, they can just say, my friend is unconscious and they're not breathing. The next thing we let them know is that if they don't feel comfortable staying in the situation that they're in, even if they call 911 and feel like they don't feel comfortable hanging around, if they call and describe the scenario that they're in and where they are and give the address, then that can be enough to sort of help the EMTs find the person who needs help, and they can leave the scene if they really don't feel comfortable sticking around.
Right, and if somebody who is around doesn't know how to distinguish between overdose and just the sleepiness and kind of lethargy that overtakes somebody, how would they know if this is happening on a regular basis to distinguish between when it's really dangerous and when the person is doing what they normally do in their drug use?
Absolutely, absolutely. So one thing that really makes the difference between someone who's just really feeling the effects of the substances that they're on and someone who is overdosing is whether or not they wake up when someone shouts their name or shakes them a little bit. So if someone is napping or, you know, just really feeling the effects, if you sort of give them a little shake on the shoulder and call their name, they should respond. If somebody shakes someone on the shoulder or calls their name and they don't wake up, then that's a sign that somebody is experiencing an overdose. There are also more obvious signs of any medical emergency, including overdose, which is if someone is not breathing at all, or if they're turning blue, that can be a sign to really sort of get medical help as soon as possible.
And who do you think are the most important people who should be learning about this in the drug user's life?
So that's a great question. So first of all, what we're really trying to do is increase communication and education among the providers who work with them. So their case managers and other sort of agencies that they might be involved with, the staff at places where they work or where they live, if they're staying in a shelter or those kinds of things. And then, of course, people who live with the person who's at risk for overdose. A really common myth about overdose is that it's instantaneous. Sometimes it can take up to 3 hours for somebody to sort of slowly sink into a state of overdose where then they're not getting enough oxygen. And so a lot of times what will happen is someone will use and then go home. And so we really encourage anyone who sort of might suspect that someone they care about is having issues with this to sort of get as much information and education as they can. And then, of course, we try to sort of open it up to everybody else because you just never know where you might encounter someone who's having this sort of emergency. And a lot of times what we've noticed in sort of collecting information in the community is that they happen in public places. So just like folks are trained in CPR as if, you know, they were going to be just out in public and might see someone having an emergency, we would encourage the same sort of level of information when it comes to overdose too.
Yes. And is the trend nationally for greater occurrences of overdoses, or is it getting less of a problem over time?
So the numbers of opioid-related overdoses are what I have the most information on, and they have been on the rise. In Massachusetts, poisoning, which includes opioid overdose, is the #1 cause of accidental injury death in the state, above car accidents. And so in 2006, there were 637 fatal overdoses in Massachusetts alone, and over 50 calls to 911 in response to opioid overdoses just in Cambridge. So the numbers are really on the rise. And another thing that contributes to that is the increase in popularity in terms of folks abusing prescription drugs. In lots of other states, especially, there's been a rise in overdoses and issues related to folks abusing prescriptions, and that's something that is dangerous in and of itself. But also, once people start to become addicted to prescription opioids, they soon realize that illegal opioids, heroin, is a lot cheaper than prescriptions. And so what we've found is that addiction to prescription opioids usually or can lead to a big risk of sort of transferring over to a heroin addiction.
And for the families affected by the drug use, sometimes there is an attitude of they feel like they're the only ones going through this. And could you talk a little bit about what types of situations this arises in, this drug use to the point of being at risk for overdose?
So I think that in my experience, I've talked with so many people in the community from all kinds of different backgrounds with all kinds of different families, and I'm hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't know someone who's going through this or doesn't know someone who's struggling with addiction. I've talked with folks who are police whose children have struggled with these issues, people in all sorts of different socioeconomic states who live in all areas of the state and all areas of the country. And so it really affects pretty much anyone. I think, we say that these substances are non-discriminatory, and so anyone is at risk for addiction or for misusing them even from the beginning. They're pretty strong, and there's a lot of misinformation about them. I know a lot of folks feel like if something is a prescription, then it must be safe or those kinds of things, and they're pretty potent and can put people at big risk.
And when responding to a situation where you fear that somebody is overdosing, time is of the essence. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And so the reason that opioids and overdoses are so dangerous is because they're depressants. So just like lots of other drugs, they sort of slow down the nervous system and the respiratory system. And so when someone is overdosing, their systems are so slowed down and so depressed that they're not getting enough oxygen.
Yes.
And so the longer there is a lack of oxygen, the more damage that can be done to the brain and eventually the heart, and it eventually can be fatal. And so the sooner somebody can get the attention that they need, the better. The silver lining to that is that, as I mentioned earlier, experiencing that level of overdose is rarely instantaneous. And so there is a window of opportunity to intervene. There's always, I always try to sort of let folks know that there's time there to sort of get your wits about you and work up the courage it takes to call 911 so that they can get the attention that they need.
And you talked about people who stop breathing. Can they still be saved once they stop breathing?
So again, I would just stress the point that time is of the essence, and because it's gradual, we sort of use the guideline that less than 12 breaths per minute is when it's getting to the point where they might not sort of get any faster on their own. And so as that sort of gradually slows down, then that's when it gets really important.
And whose idea was it to found this organization?
Sure. So the project itself is federally funded through SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. That's a branch of the Executive Office of Health and Human Services in Washington. And so the way that this sort of project came about is that SAMHSA made available funds for communities who wanted to work on the number one consequence of drug and alcohol use in their community. And in Massachusetts, that consequence, the number one consequence, is overdose. And so it was awarded through the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, through the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services, and 13 communities across the state are, really sort of gathering a lot of information specific to their community, figuring out exactly what the folks in that town need so that they can do really targeted interventions to reduce the number of fatal and non-fatal overdoses. So not only do we want to let folks know how they can respond, but we also want to teach the people who work with users how they can prevent overdoses from happening in the first place.
And I understand there's going to be a hearing at Cambridge Hospital. Could you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So on Thursday, which we decided was
The 24th
Thank
of
you.
April?
April
Yes.
24th at 3 o'clock in the Mocked Auditorium at Cambridge
Okay.
Hospital. There's going to be a public hearing to discuss the possible changes to the inpatient substance use and mental health services under the Cambridge Health Alliance, which are currently at Somerville Hospital. There's been some proposed changes, including closing those services, and so we're encouraging folks who want to learn more about that or who think that availability of detox and substance abuse programs is important to attend the hearing.
Okay. And do you feel that over time there's a greater understanding in the medical community and in the psychiatric communities of what can help prevent overdoses?
I think that huge steps have been made over the course of, professional work in terms of, understanding substance use and addiction and recovery and all the things that come along with it. I think that there are some great programs available in the community that sort of really try to meet people where they're at. There's a great spectrum of services for folks who are in recovery, who have dealt with addiction in the past and are now sort of looking for support to continue that life. And then one of our strongest partners is sort of on the other end of that spectrum at Cambridge Cares About AIDS in Central Square, where they're working with people who are still actively using substances. And they're also funded by DPH and the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services to provide Narcan to people who are using drugs. And Narcan is a nasal spray that can reverse an opioid overdose for someone who's experiencing it. And so what they're trying to do is sort of people who might use drugs together, to have folks in that group have this nasal spray on them. So if someone they're using drugs with uses too much or is experiencing lowered tolerance, that their friend can administer this Narcan to them, and it can bring them out of an overdose and buy a lot of time, so that then they can get the medical help that they need, but it's not as pressing as we discussed earlier.
Right. So it sounds like a very common sense approach, a realistic approach to it, same as the needle exchange programs that were just common sense to people who see this a lot.
I think so. I think so, and I think I'm glad that it exists, sort of like I said, in that spectrum of all kinds of different services. I really like working for this project because I think that it meets a very specific need and can sort of open the door to educate people no matter where they are in their life and sort of what kind of service they need.
Yes. And could you repeat a little bit the different ways that people can get in touch with you through the drop-in center, through email addresses, and phone numbers?
Sure, absolutely. So again, my name is Mary Amato, and I can be reached through the Cambridge Prevention Coalition through the Open project. Our website is www.cambridgeprevention.org/open. My email address is amato@cambridgema.gov. My direct phone number is 617-349-6346. And also I would encourage folks to come to our drop-in hours, which are at 119 Windsor Street on the second Monday of every month from 5 to 7 p.m. And to come to our kickoff event, which is happening on May 13th at the Middle East on Mass Ave in Central Square from 4 to 6:30 p.m. Not only is that a good way to get in touch with me, but we'll have food and refreshments and raffle prizes, and hopefully it'll be a way for people to sort of feel comfortable and get to know the project.
Well, thank you so much for being here and telling us about this important program, and I hope lots of people come and enjoy the gathering and learn a lot.
Great, thanks so much, Sharon.
Thank you, Mary.